Come take a journey with us as we take you back to our roots, growing up and living in North Idaho.
From the values instilled in us by our family and community,
to our journey of faith in overcoming challenges,
to our love of the outdoors where we find solace and adventure,
to raising a family,
and our passion to help others achieve their goals in real estate and investing.
We want to share our triumphs,
our failures,
and life lessons along the way, in hopes you will be encouraged and learn a little more about what this place we call home has to offer.
I am Jamie Jenicek.
I'm Sherry Jenicek.
Born
and raised in North Idaho.
This is Rooted. Hi, this is Jamie. You're about to meet my dad, Larry, the man who lives out on Jenicek Mountain on Highway 3 by Cave Lake. I wished I was introducing you to both of my parents. My mom, Sharon, passed away about 7 years ago. But my dad's still alive and well. He's 82 years old. He'll be 83 in a couple of weeks. If you're out on the bike path some summer between Plummer and Mullen and you see an old guy riding with blue jeans, a pair of tennis shoes, and some work gloves, it's probably my dad. At 82 years old, he did over 1,000 miles last summer on his pedal bike. Not to say he's a stubborn mule. He spends most days with a chainsaw in his hand, or he's feeding his quail and his little birds on the hill, or he's walking around the 46-acre he owns with a sawzall, cutting the tree limbs off so he can have shooting lanes underneath. My mom and my dad were awesome parents growing up. To be honest, I'm probably one of the few lucky ones that had functional family as I grew up. Again, my mom had such a big heart, would help anybody. My dad, same way, straight shooter, kind of stubborn, but just an awesome heart. I remember one day coming home from high school and he had his whole transmission and transfer case torn apart upstairs on 2 sheets of plywood in our house, but that's how he was. Way more patience than me. Super strong work ethic, very honest and very trustworthy. In fact, he had such a reputation for being a good worker. When I was growing up, there was times when I would call people out by Harrison, and all I had to do was tell them my dad was Larry Jenicek. No further questions. They just said, show up Monday morning and we'll be there ready to work. So that's the way I was raised. Let me introduce you to my dad, Larry.
I'm Larry Jenicek. I was born in 41. It was just before the war. I was born at home in Pinehurst. My older brothers and sisters were born at Harrison, went to school at Kingston, and then when I was in the 9th grade, we had the new school in Pinehurst. They built a new school. Things were going. And then after that, I went to high school in the new school in Kellogg, where Gabe graduated. And we broke that in. And I went to school there for 3 years. I went a year to school at North Idaho, and I didn't like that. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I just couldn't stand it. So then I worked at the tire shop. I worked at the zinc plant. I think at that time I was working at the zinc plant. Back then, the opportunities for jobs for a young guy, you could graduate from high school. Like me, I didn't know what I wanted to be. Back then, when you graduated, the idea was to get a job and get a little money and just go, and all I ever wanted to do was just have enough to get by, and I didn't have any big dreams. I didn't want to get out of here in a hurry and leave and stuff. I was happy. I guess my family was here. I was raised on Social Security. That was it, and what jobs us kids could get. I do remember one thing in the 50s. I think it was about that time. It was right after my dad died. Must have been 1956 or something. And my brother was working at the zinc plant. He was a welder. And he bought a new TV. And this is what I'm comparing prices and things today to back then. By that time, he was probably making $3 something an hour. He went and bought a brand new TV for us. It was a 21-inch, black and white. Okay, you think of this. He was making like $4 an hour. He paid $550 some for that TV. A hard time in my life, that would have had to been, my dad died in 55. He was 55. He was born in 1899. And he was an alcoholic. And he had been down to my Uncle Charlie's, One-Shot Charlie's in Harrison. Well, they were brothers, and it was, what one guy told me up at the zinc plant, he says, I really liked your relation, but he says, if you went to, he said, it was never a friendly drink, it was always a friendly drunk. Well, Charlie was a people person. He loved people. He sold beer for 20 cents a glass. The other guys at the other bar, they got mad. You got to raise your price. I can't make it. Charlie says, tough. They said he was one of the strongest guys you could imagine. They said at the old time Chryslers, they said he could reach down, back up and reach down and grab it by the bumper and lift the front end of the car off the ground. And I remember one time, he was 62 years old, and that guy came up from the gateway, the guy that first built it. And he's, Charlie, he says, I'm tired of this. He says, I'm going to arm wrestle you, and if I win, you have to raise your beer to 40 cents. They said, Charlie sat up there, and the guy put his arm up, and he says, Charlie just turned him down. The guy just walked back down the hill. He didn't. that was overdone. Back then, the young people had parties. No drinking. It was just they would go. They would take their records in their little record player and would play music and just visit and have a good time. And I met her at one of those dances, and then she had to go babysit, so I took her to her babysitting job, and after a while we went together 2 years, I think, and then we got married. Started in on a family. We were married 53 years. And of course, everything was pretty much here. Sharon wasn't too crazy about this, and I never held that against. She took cooking classes, stained glass, gardening, sewing class. I did plenty of every class that they they came up with out here. Anyway, I've always been interested in so many different things. That's why Sarah's and I's garden there. That was fun this year, doing that with her. When we moved here, and I put the garden in, and we got the milk over at the dairy. This was different living then. The dairy's not there anymore. We went over and bought the cat milk, because whole milk's no good for you, it'll kill you. And so we bought the cat milk, and with the stuff, we sat here and ate dinner, and I would look, there wasn't hardly anything out of the store. Sharon baked all the bread. We had all the stuff out of the garden, and we had elk and deer. And I'd buy maybe a half a beef and a half a pork a year or something. So people lived different then. We lived in a motel in Osborne, and then we found a house up Sunshine Mine, and we lived there, and then we got a place in Smelterville. We had 2 kids. Well, we had one when we moved there, and then we had 2. We had Jamie. we had to fix his brother a bed, and we put it in the bathroom. And then I decided we needed a bigger place. So I worked 2 jobs. I worked at the zinc plant, and then I drove truck for the freight outfit, delivery truck. We bought a house in Pinehurst. Then we got another kid, and I got another job. I worked 3 jobs for a while to get by. By then I had a family, and my interest in was raising a family. And as I was raising the kids, they had bikes, they had a bed, each had their own beds. They had a lot of things that some of the kids didn't have. They each had their own clothes. See, this was a problem. Sharon was, her family, they all had the same clothes. So every morning it was a big fight over who got to wear what to go to school. She was going to do that with kids. I says, no. I says, we never had money, but us kids all had our own clothes. And my kids are going to have their own clothes. And then, after you can see Jamie, what would the other kids do in his clothes? And so Lonnie was skinny as a rail, and Jamie made him look that much worse. And Todd was a little guy. So we grew up there and then moved out here, and even when we moved out here, they went to school out here before we got the house done. And my wife used to bring them out to Rose Lake. Todd went to school in Rose Lake, and the other 2 went to Kootenai until we got the house. And while we moved in, there was no roof on one side. Nowadays, everything has to be done and perfect before you can move in. It wasn't that way then. You didn't have the money to do that. You put money away and worked on it. When you got enough money to buy the stuff, then you finished working on it. And so anyway, I got it this far. I had one old little camper I used in the woods. When I worked up at Porcupine Pass, up the river, Sharon and the kids came up and stayed with me. We put Todd in the window, Jamie in the bed, Lenny in the pickup, and Sharon and I had a little deal there with the table pillow. And that was about, hey, it worked. And that's the way you did things. Those were the times that were the best times. Like Jamie, pulling the boat across the... Well, now you can't bass fish without a $50,000 boat. Back when I grew up, it was a 5-horse Johnson and a 12-foot dinghy. And the families went out, they had a picnic. Of course, they would go out at Coeur d'Alene Lake. They would take their little boat, they would go out and fish and troll for trout, and then come lunchtime, they'd go into the shore and build a fire and have lunch. You can't do that anymore. You can't go to shore. So it's a change in the times, and that's what I say. It's awful hard for me to say, for young people starting out, it's got to be hard, because when I was high school, us kids would say, boy, we get out, we get a job, and you could go to bunker then and work the rest of your life. And now, you might go to work tomorrow and your job's gone. Everything is so unsettled. I don't know how to give anybody any advice. I just think back and I thank the Lord every day for letting me live here. The only time I thought about moving from this area was when I went to work in the woods. I knew people from other areas, and if you look, they didn't have any more than I had, and I probably would have had to gone to another town, because when you're married with kids, women like to be in town or close to it, you know. When I bought the place in Pinehurst, I paid $11,000 for it. But my problem was, see, I worked at Bunker. When I first started working there, I got $2.12 an hour. But I think by the time I bought the house, I was clear up to $3. But I forget how much for a down payment. So we worked with a realtor, we worked with the owner of the house, and I had some money for down payment, and then he was building a new house, and I went and worked on that new house to help pay for the down payment. I think I was taking home $82.50 a week. Well, I had a car payment of $80, groceries, and my heat bill was in the wintertime was pretty high because it was gas heat, and it wasn't cheap. It was around $80. So that's why we hunted. And a lot of people grew their groceries. Well, I couldn't grow groceries, and so I just thought the house didn't have a basement. And I thought, like Pinehurst, it's nothing but rock. So I thought, well, I'll dig a basement. And there was a window for a crawl space under the house. So I didn't have a pickup. So I had an old 53 Chevrolet car. And I built a box and put in the trunk of that. They're just up Pine Creek, just around the corner. The guy I guess before you went to the quarter, there was a guy wanted Phil. He had a sign out there, Phil wanted. That's the way we did things back then. And that was the people helping people. And so I dug that basement and I built a ramp and a deal. I pulled it up and put it in the trunk of the car and hauled it up until I got the basement dug out and put the walls up and poured the floor, and we had a basement then. Was fishing. I was still living in Pinehurst, and I was fishing down at Thompson Lake, and I drove by here and this property was for sale. So we'd looked for property up the river, but we figured they wanted too much money. I thought, well, people lived to where they went to work. I wanted to move out where my recreation was and then drive to work. Well, that fit in with me working in the woods because you went all over the country to work in the woods. We bought this and built this house, and that's where we raised our kids. We brought our kids out here, and I guess that's about it. I'm still here raising kids down here at the neighbors. When we bought the property, I paid $16,000 for it, a little over $16,000. But I had saved bonds. You could buy, what did they call them? Government bonds. They started out during the war. I could buy a $25 bond a month, and I forget what I bought. It was like $4 and something out of my check every week. I couldn't borrow the money to buy the land. Banks would not loan money on land at all. But I found a banker and that knew me, and he loaned me the money to buy the land. I remember it was kind of scary because I was working in St. Mary's at that time, and I called him. And I says, I need some money. I says, I can't get a loan. I'm having a terrible time. And he says, well, he says, how much do you need? And I told him, and he says, okay, I'll get the paperwork in the mail. This was just for the down payment that I was going through this. But my insurance guy, life insurance guy, offered to loan me the money. But I got the banker, and I called him, and he says, I'll get the paperwork in the mail. And we went on. I says, okay, fine. And he says, what did you want the money for, Larry? And I says, I want to buy some land. And he floored me. He says, good. I'll get the paperwork in there tomorrow. He says, I'll get your money in your checking account. He says, you can sign the papers when you come in. Does that sound like today? So that was, and so that was how I got the land. And then I just, it was in escrow, so I paid that, and I paid that off that way. I have one thing about the difference in times. When I was working construction, and that was during the big movement from California to Coeur d'Alene. And we were up on Armstrong Park, putting in a gas line. We used to work together with companies. You come and do, and we just helped one another. That was the way you did it. We were up there, and this kid come up, and he was working on the phone line there, and he was putting in the phone line, and my brother says, where are you from? He says, I don't want to tell you. He says, I came up from California, I forget how long before, and he said, the people were so nice. He says, they treated me so good, they helped me so much. And he says, it was great. And he says, that's all gone. I couldn't believe it, you know. The old bus driver, in fact, he drove buses for 3 generations for us kids, and he was the fire chief in Kellogg. Quite an old guy, and we was working in Coeur d'Alene, and he drove up one day and he was talking to us. And here's the difference. He says, he's talking there, and pretty quick, he grabs a shovel and starts shoveling. He couldn't, they had to help. The people didn't help one another. And you still have people like that today. You do. There's a lot of good people, and I'm not trying to put it down. It's because we had our jerks back then, but they usually had problems. But in my position, I don't feel like I should sell this. And if I did, how much money would I, if I wanted to get enough money to buy something else, I'd have to have a high price on it. Because if you're going to buy anything else, it's going to be high priced. I actually bought everything I have here with minimum wage. And now, sure, it's worth something, but as you get older, the money isn't important. Like I say, little things I'm happy with. I got my cowboy books. I got my puzzles. I got a couple chainsaws. The problem is the one I used in the woods, I don't have enough strength to start it. I can't pick it up.